I watched as the young boy, he closed his eyes, he said some words, he took the shotgun, he pulled the trigger. What followed? The imagery, the memory, the vision implanted in one's mind, in one's memory. No one should ever see. This podcast is about the memory of suicide. The default position of suicide is a method one falls into when all hope appears lost. This episode is about surviving suicide. It's about surviving suicide memory. Welcome to the 13 Elephants podcast. My name is Dr. Michael. Follow 13 Elephants and my story on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, and please click the bell and subscribe to 13 Elephants on YouTube. I appreciate you all. I thank you all so very much for allowing me into your space to share the story. This is the 13 Elephants podcast. I am Dr. Michael. Come along for the ride. In my memory, there are 3 times when suicide was what appeared to be my only option. My only out. All 3 times involved in some part my inability to regulate my self-thoughts, where these self-thoughts had taken over from the reality of what was occurring at any given time. All 3 times when suicide had appeared my only option were about me internalizing the external thoughts. I did this because I was alone. I was injured. I was hurting. I was scared. The first time, suicide memory 1, I was in my 20s. The common theme throughout my childhood, throughout my teenage years, rolled over to my 20s. The feeling I was alone. I was abandoned. People left me. On the outside, to the outside world, in my 20s, I was a successful business person. I had things together. I was functioning well. I was an admired individual in society, and I was well liked. I was well loved. But on the inside, the space where I talked to myself over and over and over again, where I would tell myself that there was something wrong with me. I would tell myself that I was just not so well adjusted. The history of suicide memory is flawed. It's flawed with multiple views of self, multiple views of how we define ourselves. It's flawed with the events leading to, the reasons why, and the understandings of what actually happened in our suicide memory. In my 20s, one of the stories I repeatedly told myself, it involved a gun, a stripper, and a deer, where Russian roulette and luck played a part in my survival, where I lost the game, but I won my life, where the truth is in the lived experience of the memory of the event, And whether that's understood by the outside world is irrelevant in suicide memory, because it's where the third space lived experience is true. It's where it's authentic. Simply by chance, my ill-placed attempts to end my life in my 20s, they just didn't pan out. I had purposeful processes of wanting to end my life, and I always defaulted to suicide memory, where I'd forced myself to see that suicide was the only way out to end the pain that I would see in the eyes of others as they looked at me and tried to understand me. To end this pain that I saw in the eyes of other people was all that I knew I could do. Where they questioned why I felt the way I did, where their gaze was my reason for understanding myself, where all I could see was what they saw in me, which was confusion, bewilderment, a lack of understanding. All I felt was this about the way I saw myself. Suicide memory 1 was planned as much as it could be. I was drinking around that time, but not that drinking made any difference, because my next 2 suicide memories involved no alcohol, no drugs. There was nothing. There was nothing to subdue the internal thoughts. Suicide memory 1 involved me running away from me, yet only to find me in a place where I always knew I was, a place of sanity in an insane world, where my learned knowledge of pain and suffering, it hadn't matured yet. It didn't mature in my 20s, it was much later when it matured. But I began to see in others a similar hurt in my 20s, a similar default positionality of all is lost, and all that is left is the only choice one can make, which is to take one's life. Suicide memory 1 was the start of my apprenticeship into learning and understanding and developing a suicide memory for all time. The second time, suicide memory 2. I was in my 40s, and I had had 10 years of higher level education into the understanding of human emotion. I had 10 years of knowing about human cognitive abilities and inabilities, about human internal warfare. Suicide memory 2 had the intellect and the research behind it to establish a sound and rational critical argument about suicide, which was informed by a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, a doctoral level of education, where there was no way for me to critique against the suicide memory. There was only the robust and clear understanding at the theoretical and the lived experience level that left me to justify suicide memory, to understand the reasons why people have that memory of default suicide, to understand that it was an okay space to get to. It was an okay space to get to when the lived experience led one there, when the pain led one there. During my 40s, it was a time when I had researched many case studies on suicide, many reasons leading to the demise of self, or the self-loathing, or the hopelessness of self. Suicide memory 2 was a time when I helped one person, a woman. I helped her from realizing the truth of suicide. I sat with her and I spoke with her directly, inappropriately, telling her if they were to harm herself, it would be permanent, that there was nothing anyone, not me, anyone could do to stop her. Telling her that I would be there for her, with her, if she made that decision. Thankfully, she did not. She survived. Suicide memory 2 was when the apprenticeship had ended. The tradesman was now qualified and experienced in the knowledge of suicide memory and in the very lived experiences of suicide. The third time, suicide memory 3, the educated me, the lived experience me, the well-experienced me. Suicide memory 3 was the time when I had all the education. I had all the lived experiences. I had all the third-party voices of the third-party participants giving me reason why to harm oneself was entrenched, was embedded, was ingrained in them and me. To understand how to critique, to articulate why suicide memory ends a life. Suicide memory 3, where I'd been working with young children for so many years, where I'd heard all the ways a child and an adult, all the ways that they might suicide, where I'd seen the tears, where I'd held the people who had lost their loved ones, where I'd sat across and looked into the eyes of the children in pain, hurting, searching for hope, searching for understanding, where I had the responsibility in my working environment to ensure that safety of all the children was paramount. When parents, caregivers, doctors, psychiatrists, psychologists, counsellors, teachers, nurses all wanted answers, yet there were none. There were none. There were none to give. Where the ability to stop suicide memory from revisiting those of us who cement this memory into our very being was impossible. Where the practitioner of those in need ratio, it just didn't allow for the survivor rate to be greater than the attempts made to end one's life. Where all my educational knowledge, all my experiences of hearing the voices of the participants of suicide memory, all my own lived experiences of suicide memory meant little. And the final choice to end a life took hold. Suicide memory 3 was the time I realized that the suicide memory will stay in many of us always, yet always we know the pain others suffer. We see the eyes of others as they gaze upon us with love and with detest, with hurt, with the just do it, with their view of pain that does not relate to the lived experiences of suicide memory, a pain that does not relate to the third space understanding of suicide memory that is informed by education, is informed by others' experiences, is informed by our very own lived experiences. To view the image of a person taking their life is horrific. It's shocking. It's alarming. To sit with a person wanting to take their life, to try and talk them out of it, to try and do everything in one's power to map a route that takes the person away from their pain, takes that person away from their pain and towards a place that no longer locks that person in self-demise. It's impossible. It's impossible because there are just not enough people. There's not enough people to sit with the person experiencing suicide memory, because in some way, we all experience suicide memory. It's in all of us. For me, I sit with people in suicide memory. If they want to sit with me, I sit with them. I can't be there for all those who choose not to sit with me, and I can't be there for everyone, but I can be there for some. And by being there for some, in the space of suicide memory, it's a safe space for me because I have the learned knowledge. I have learned through a lifetime of hurt, a lifetime of joy, a lifetime of pain, a lifetime of resilience, a lifetime of the third space experience, understanding what suicide memory is at the lived level, at the critical and critiqued level. I know that sitting in suicide memory and sharing the lived suicide memory is what gets us through. It's what helps. And it's the right way of being there for someone. When we, the suicide memory third space lived experience holder, are also the participants in the survival of us. And you know what? The survival of us, that's an honest and a very authentic place to be. My name is Dr. Michael. This is the 13 Elephants podcast. Follow me in my story of the lived experience on Spotify, on Apple Podcast, and on YouTube. I appreciate you all. I thank you all so very much for allowing me into your space to share the story. Come along for the ride.